Peter, this is a fascinating book. It's Fatal Dive, Solving the World War II Mystery of the USS Grunion. I have a question, first of all, to ask you. Of all the discoveries and mysteries of World War II, why did this fascinate you? Because I think for a lot of people, we don't even know about this.
Well, it got a lot of play several years ago in the local press and also on the Today Show and a number of outlets because it was rather an extraordinary story. And also, the three brothers who went looking for the Grunion, which was commanded by their father in World War II and had gone missing 70 years ago, they're from around here. As a matter of fact,
Hmm.
one of them in particular is very well known. He co-founded and was CEO of Boston Scientific, which is a global medical company. So
Well,
it's very
tell us about the USS Grunion. What is the issue about this that caused it to go missing?
Well, on July 30th, 1942, she was operating up in the Aleutian Islands in the Bering Sea, some of the worst waters in the world. If anyone's seen The Deadliest Catch, you have some idea just how bad and nasty it is up there. And the Grunion was operating up there, engaging the Japanese who had invaded the Aleutians. And she went missing without a trace on July 30th, 1942. One last garbled message was the last communication from her, and then nothing, silence for almost 65 years.
Wow, that is amazing. Now, okay, so this is a submarine in those rough waters. I know the Aleutians, there were some battles that went on with the Japanese, I believe it was. It really aren't part of our common knowledge of history. Were there a lot of
Uh,
submarines in that area at that
there
time up there?
Yeah, sorry. There were a lot of American submarines operating there. Task Force 8 was what the Grunion was assigned to. And one of the Aleutian Islands, Dutch Harbor, there was a U.S. naval base there and a sub base there. That was their home base up there. But the Japanese had invaded the Aleutians and had occupied two of the islands, Kiska and Attu. Now, these are very remote. They're about 1,400 miles west of Anchorage. And the Japanese had started this as a feint to cover a bigger move towards Midway, which, as we know, turning point they lost. But it would allow them to say that they had occupied American soil. Technically, it was true. So this was called the Forgotten Campaign. And one of the reasons was wartime censors here weren't eager to let Americans know that the Japanese were on American soil, at least for a while.
Okay, so this submarine goes missing for 65 years, you say, and then it's discovered? Is that pretty much how is that the short, very short story?
Well, it was a long process, not quite. When the Grunion, after she had gone missing in September 1942, the families of Jim Abele, the commander of the Grunion, and also his 69 crewmen, they received the dreaded yellow telegrams from the War Department saying that their loved ones were missing in action, and then eventually it would be changed to killed in action. But there were no answers, and the Navy couldn't give any answers at that point. And also because of wartime censorship, understandably, they wouldn't. They weren't going to give everybody details about where subs, units, any of this thing had met their fate. So Kay Abele, the widow of Jim Abele, wrote letters to all the crewmen's families and said she would try to find out anything and everything she could about what had actually happened. Well, 20 years later, 30 years later, she was still trying to find out answers. And meanwhile, her three boys who had lost their father at the age of 12, 9, and 5, had gone on, become very, very successful, all three of them. And they never forgot their father. They always wanted answers. They always wondered what had happened. And their mother had instilled this in them too. So in the 1980s, 1990s, one of the brothers, Brad Abele, began to try to compile every known fact about the Grunion he could find, searching through records, talking to people, other submariners who had been up in the area, and just trying to get a handle on what might have happened. And he put them together in a self-entitled manuscript called Jim, which he presented to the family. Well, that kind of got the ball rolling. But the fact was, other than she had gone down somewhere in the Aleutians, that was it, all the information they had. They had nothing else to go on,
Hmm.
and there was no information forthcoming.
Wow, so how did they get information? Because that's a huge, vast area of property, so to speak.
It is. It is. And two things happened. First of all, in 2001, they, by chance, were put in touch with a Japanese scholar named Yutaka Iwasaka. Now, Yutaka had found and translated a number of Japanese naval documents, including eyewitness accounts of a battle between an armed Japanese cargo ship and an American submarine
Hmm.
off Kiska Island in the exact area that the Grunion had been operating on July 30th. And the Grunion was the only submarine still operating in that area because all the others were on their way back to Dutch Island. The Grunion never received that message apparently. So The Abele brothers, they saw this document and they were convinced, and rightfully so, that it could only be the Grunion. Saiichi Ayora, the Japanese captain, had written a very detailed account of the battle in which his ship had almost been sunk. She was crippled by the Grunion, by one of the torpedoes, and was just firing away while she was dead in the water and waiting for help, and the Grunion was closing in for the kill. Jim Abele and his crew had already sunk two other Japanese ships up there, and he was on his way to compiling a sterling record, one of the best ones early in the war, he and his crew. So the Japanese claimed that they had sunk the American submarine more or less at this spot. And there were three eyewitness accounts, two others besides the captain. And the interesting aspects of these accounts wouldn't dawn until later. But this gave the Abele something to go on. The second step was a chance meeting between John Abele, the man who founded Boston Scientific, and Robert Bob Ballard, the man who found the Titanic, world famous. And John presented the information to Ballard, and Ballard was really intrigued by it. And he said they should talk, and it's possible that they might be able to do something here. So John set up a meeting at Boston Scientific outside Boston with Bob Ballard and the other two Abele brothers, Bruce and Brad, along with some friends of the family. And they came to the conclusion that it was going to be extremely difficult. It was a long shot, but it just might be worth the effort. It was possible. The problem was that Ballard was already committed to a National Geographic expedition in the Black Sea in August of 2006. And that was the only time that you could have any hope at all of getting sonar equipment down into those waters because they're so rough. It's the only window at the end of August to do that. So he couldn't do it. But the Abele's still decided it could be done. John said to his brothers, I think we can do this. John and his brothers had the wherewithal to try to do this on their own. As you might imagine, an extremely costly proposition, but it was worth it to them. And it wasn't just about finding their own dad's whereabouts, his resting place at this point. They felt a commitment to the other families on the crew that they deserved answers to. So they went about putting together an expedition, and in a pretty unorthodox way, not the way that you would think. And rather than some sleek state-of-the-art research vessel, they weren't able to come up with something like that. They did a very smart thing. They found themselves a swashbuckling Alaskan fisherman, a man named Cale Garcia, who knew these waters like the back of his hand. He'd been fishing for black cod and Alaskan king crab in those waters since he was 18 or 19 years old. He was one of the youngest skippers up there, and he had a ship called the Aquila, which was a functional but weather-beaten crabber and codder. And the Abele's hired him to take the equipment with a team of experts from a company called Williamson and Associates, based out of Seattle, sonar experts, to take the chance, haul this equipment out into the worst waters in the world, arguably, and in August of 2006, see what they could find. And again, they were searching a huge area. At this point, the area that they were searching was going to be anything up to 200 square miles, which really makes us far more than a needle in a haystack.
Wow, that's for sure.
Yeah.
How long did it take them to find that?
Well, it took them several days to find it because with sonar. And what they found, they had some hits, and the images looked like a sub to them. And some of the experts there, they felt like they were 95% certain, the team they had hired, that this was a sub, this was a Grunion. The only reason they even found these images was while the Aquila was on its way out in July of 2006, Yutaka, back in Japan, came across in the Japanese archives a chart. And this chart by the captain of the Japanese freighter that had fought the American submarine, still unnamed at this point, and showed the exact coordinates that he had marked down where his ship was and where the American submarine was. This narrowed it down from some 200 square miles to something more on the order of 4 to 20, which is still a huge area, and looking for something 3,000 feet down or more. But it really did narrow it, and it gave them a focus, an area, rather than zeroing in on it, trying to zero in on a whole bunch of different areas. They were able to more or less zero in on this area. And it allowed them to start, they found these images. And that wasn't the end of it. Bob Ballard and a lot of experts, rightfully so, they were cautioning the Abele's to be not so much skeptical, but to be a little bit wary because there were a lot of wrecks in the area. And a lot of people felt this looked more like a surface ship down there, or even a dead whale, volcanic outcrop. And they couldn't determine 100% that this was a submarine. The Abele's believed it was. As it turned out, they were right. And what they decided to do was to go back in the following summer, August of 2007, but this time with an ROV, a remote operated vehicle, the same type of vehicle that was lowered to find the Titanic
Oh,
and
yeah.
some of the other wreck. They needed visual proof. And so this is what they set about doing in August '07. And this time, John Abele was going to accompany them. John went on the voyage this time. And the circumstances, the way in which they found the ship, just remarkable. They got really lucky.
It is, yeah.
They got really lucky.
Now, it's still down there, I assume?
Oh, it is still down there, and it will remain down there. She's battered.
Yeah, how deep is that?
3,000 feet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, we've only got a couple minutes. I imagine for the family, this helps to close a lot of chapters of things, just knowing that's where it is, right?
I think so. I think it does. And they made sure they shared the news with the family, what they call the Grunion family, Grunion network. It became international because of the web. And they would never have found Utaka if it wasn't for the web. But closure, I think, is, in talking with a lot of the people, closures, it's kind of a relative term. Yes, closure in the sense that they know finally where the sub went down. They know how it went down. So in that sense, they know, no question, that their loved ones were heroes. They went down in action fighting this Japanese ship. And I think it brings closure, at least a sense, some kind of sense of peace with that. Even after all these years, the mystery is solved. They know where their loved ones went down. So I do think it does bring a measure of peace to people in that respect. And that was the Abele's intent, not just for themselves, but to try to bring some measure, as you say, of closure and peace to the families.
Makes you wonder how many other mysteries are still there to be discovered.
When it comes to shipwrecks, I think it's endless. I really do.
Well, Fatal Dive, solving the World War II mystery of the USS Grunion. Peter Stevens, the author of all of that. I'll bet you kind of got enraptured with all of this when you were doing your investigation and writing this book.
Very much so. Especially once I had spoken with the Abele's, I was hooked. It was that simple.
Wow, that's fascinating. Thanks for being with us. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much. Very much appreciated.